Africa, the second largest continent, is bounded by the Mediterranean Sea, the Red Sea, the Indian Ocean, and the Atlantic Ocean. It is divided in half almost equally by the equator. Africa's physical geography, environment and resources, and human geography can be considered separately. The origin of the name Africa is greatly disputed by scholars. Most believe it stems from words used by the Phoenicians, Greeks, and Romans. Important words include the Egyptian word Afruika, meaning motherland, the Greek word Afrique, meaning without colt, and the Latin word Aprica, meaning sunny. A number of factors influence Africa's sunny climate. The equator nearly bisects the continent into two equal parts. Climatic zones lie on either side of this line as if it were a mirror, with tropical wet climates closer to the equator and more arid conditions closer to the tropics. This climatic symmetry is disturbed, however, by Africa's unequal shape. The continent's narrow southern section is far more influenced by oceanic factors than the bulging northern section. Africa's northern half is more dry and hot, while its southern end is more humid and cool. Climatic factors greatly influence Africa's agriculture, which is considered the continent's single most important economic activity. Agriculture employs 2/3 of the continent's working population and contributes 20 to 60% of every country's gross domestic product, GDP. GDP is the total value of goods and services produced in a country during 1 year. Important climatic regions of agriculture include tropical wet, savanna, desert, Mediterranean, and highland. Tropical wet conditions occur along the equator, the Gulf of Guinea, and the East Madagascar coast. Temperatures remain near 27 degrees Celsius, 80 degrees Fahrenheit, year-round. Annual precipitation varies from 152 centimeters, 60 inches, inland to 330 centimeters, 130 inches, along the coasts. Important crops to Africa's tropical wet regions include the plantain, pineapple, coffee, cocoa, and oil palms. Oil from this palm tree is the primary cooking oil in Africa, as familiar as olive oil or corn oil in North America. Savanna conditions occur in much of eastern and southern Africa. Temperatures here are cooler and more variant than in tropical wet regions. Annual precipitation is between 50 and 152 centimeters, 20 to 60 inches. The dry season in the savanna can last as long as 6 months. Important savanna crops include the cassava, related to the potato, peanuts, peppers, okra, eggplant, cucumber, and watermelon. Africa's most important grain crops, millet and sorghum, are grown here. Desert conditions occur in northern Africa, especially in the Sahara and the Sahel. Temperatures can range from 54 degrees Celsius, 130 degrees Fahrenheit, or on the hottest days to freezing on the coldest nights. Annual precipitation never exceeds 25 centimeters, 10 inches, and some areas go without rain for years. Important desert crops include date palms and cotton. Mediterranean climate conditions occur along the extreme northern and southern coasts of Africa. These regions have mild temperatures, dry summers, and moderately rainy winters. Important crops include figs, olives, oranges, tomatoes, onions, and large vegetables, such as cabbage and cauliflower. Highland conditions occur in the highest elevations of Africa, particularly in the Ethiopian highlands. Temperatures here are much colder than the surrounding lowlands. Precipitation depends on the orientation of the mountain in relation to moisture-bearing winds. Important highland crops include alfalfa, potatoes, and wheat. Forestry, the management of trees and other vegetation in forests, is an important economic activity in Africa. On average, forest products account for 6% of Africa's gross domestic product, GDP, more than any other continent. This is a result of Africa's abundant forest cover, with 0.8 hectares, 2 acres, per person, compared with 0.6 hectares, 1.5 acres, globally. In Central and Western Africa, where forest cover is heaviest, the forest sector contributes more than 60% of GDP. The export of forest products, especially high-grade woods like mahogany and okoum, brings in significant revenue. These woods are mostly found in the countries of the Congo Basin, Cameroon, Central African Republic, Republic of the Congo, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Gabon, and Equatorial Guinea, where there is a dense rainforest. Okoum, for example, accounts for 90% of the trees logged in Gabon. These woods are generally exported to Japan, Israel, and the European Union. Mahogany and okoum are used to make everything from homes to musical instruments to lightweight aircraft. Africa's forest sector, however, suffers from illegal logging and overharvesting of certain tree species. Many species of both mahogany and okoum are endangered. Experts argue that overharvesting will eventually destroy forest habitats. Saplings planted to replace the log trees do not grow fast enough to be harvested on a regular basis, and the rainforest habitat in which these trees thrive is being destroyed for agriculture and development. Today, Africa is torn between developing its forests to their fullest economic potential and protecting these natural landscapes from overdevelopment. For instance, the Central African Forests Commission regulates Africa's forestry sector and promotes sustainable uses of the Congo Basin's rainforest products. The Commission created the Senga Tree National Landscape, a reserve that covers more than 1 million hectares, 2.4 million acres, of rainforest in Cameroon, the Central African Republic, and the Republic of the Congo. Africa's fishing industry provides income to more than 10 million people and has an annual export value of $2.7 billion. Africa has fisheries on all its marine coasts, as well as inland. The Great Lakes and Nile River, for instance, support huge freshwater fisheries. Marine fisheries are important to many coastal countries in Africa. West Africa is one of the most economically important fishing zones in the world, producing 4.5 million tons of fish in 2000. Namibia and South Africa are also major players in the marine fish market, exporting between 80 and 90% of their fish annually. The Eastern African countries of Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia, and Kenya have well-established fisheries in the Red Sea and Indian Ocean. Small fish such as herring and sardines are the most common catch on the African coastline. However, larger fish, such as tuna, cod, hake, and haddock, are the most profitable. Africa's extensive inland fisheries contain more than 3,000 fish species and account for 2/3 of global inland fish production. Unlike marine fisheries, the catch from Africa's inland fisheries is not exported. It is consumed almost entirely on the continent, forming a major source of people's protein intake. Africa's Great Lakes support the largest inland fisheries on the continent. Lake Victoria is the most productive freshwater fishery in the world, producing more than 500,000 tons of fish worth $600 million every year. The Nile perch, a highly prized catch that can weigh more than 45 kilograms, 100 pounds, and the Nile tilapia are Lake Victoria's dominant commercial fish species. Much like the forestry sector, Africa's fishing sector suffers from overharvesting. As a result, in the past century, fish stocks have declined by up to half in some coastal zones. The Partnership for African Fisheries, PAF, is being implemented to strengthen Africa's fisheries sector. PAF will focus on stricter regulations and environmental management. These processes will increase fishery revenue and promote the sustainable use of marine and inland fish resources. Africa is a major producer of important metals and minerals. Metals exported by African countries include uranium, used to produce nuclear energy, platinum, used in jewelry and industrial applications, nickel, used in stainless steel, magnets, coins, and rechargeable batteries, bauxite, a main aluminum ore, and cobalt, used in color pigments. Africa's two most profitable mineral resources are gold and diamonds. In 2008, Africa produced about 483 tons of gold, or 22% of the world's total production. South Africa accounts for almost half of Africa's gold production. Ghana, Guinea, Mali, and Tanzania are other major producers of gold. Africa dominates the global diamond market. In 2008, the continent produced 55% of the world's diamonds. Botswana, Angola, South Africa, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Namibia are Africa's largest producers of diamonds. Unfortunately, several African conflicts and civil wars have been caused and funded by the diamond industry. Diamonds that come from these regions are known as conflict diamonds or blood diamonds. In 2002, the United Nations created the Kimberley Process Certification Scheme, KPCS, in order to certify diamonds from sources that are free of conflict. The KPCS also aims to prevent diamond sales from financing wars. Countries that do not meet KPCS requirements are not allowed to trade with much of the rest of the world. The Republic of the Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Côte d'Ivoire have all been expelled at some point in the last decade. Africa is home to select deposits of oil and natural gas, which are drilled for energy and fuel. In 2007, the continent produced 12.5% of the world's total oil production and 6.45% of the world's total natural gas production. Nigeria, Libya, Algeria, Egypt, and Angola dominate Africa's oil industry. Oil exploration has significantly increased on the continent, and many countries are looking to become first-time producers. Oil and natural gas production have also been connected to civil conflict. In Nigeria, guerrilla groups have attacked oil infrastructure and stolen oil from pipelines since the early 1990s. These groups, primarily ethnic minorities, say foreign oil companies have exploited their labor while keeping most of the wealth. They also charge that out-of-date equipment has severely polluted air, soil, and water resources. This pollution has led to losses in arable land and fish stocks. However, the severe actions of these guerrilla groups have also increased pollution as they have damaged equipment. The attacks have also reduced production and local income, as many companies are forced to shut down. Africa's natural resource economy contributes greatly to the continent's built environment, or human-made buildings and structures. The largest engineering projects and urban areas are directly linked to the production and trade of resources such as water, oil, and minerals. Yet much like the resource economies described above, Africa's infrastructure suffers from poor management and inefficient government regulation. Africa is home to a number of engineering marvels. The Aswan Dam, a complex of 2 dams in Aswan, Egypt, captures the world's longest river, the Nile, in the world's 3rd largest reservoir, Lake Nasser. The Aswan High Dam, the newer and larger of the 2 dams, produces more than 10 billion kilowatt-hours of electricity every year, enough power for about 15% of the country. The Aswan Dam complex regulates the flooding of the Nile and stores water for agriculture. While farmland has increased by 500% as a result of the dam, land fertility has decreased. Nutrient-rich silt is unable to spread over the Nile Valley because it is trapped in Lake Nasser. The Driefontein gold mine outside of Johannesburg, South Africa, is one of the largest gold mines in the world. The mine is made up of 8 shafts that reach depths of up to 3,352 meters, 11,000 feet, underground. One of the shafts is in the process of being deepened to about 4,115 meters, 13,500 feet, making it the deepest mine in the world. These extreme depths make mining operations incredibly dangerous at Driefontein, which has one of the worst records of employee fatalities in the industry. 2 urban areas that demonstrate Africa's uneven growth are Lagos, Nigeria, and Johannesburg, South Africa. Both of these large cities have distinct economic engines that make them favorable for growth. At the same time, each faces similar problems as a result of this growth. Lagos is Africa's 2nd most populous city, with a population of about 10.2 million people. Lagos is growing 10 times faster than New York City, New York, or Los Angeles, California, in the United States. The United Nations estimates that Lagos will be one of the largest megacities in the world by 2015. Lagos is the commercial and industrial hub of Nigeria, which has a gross domestic product that is triple that of any other West African country. Located on the oil-rich Gulf of Guinea and adjacent to the Niger Delta, Lagos is a center of oil extraction, refining, and export. The city is tied to the rise and fall of oil prices, creating cycles of extreme wealth and poverty. Lagos' unregulated growth has created a sprawling and chaotic urban landscape. Poor immigrants from rural Nigeria have flooded the city looking for economic opportunities. Residential zones are overcrowded, averaging 6 people per room. Slum communities are growing rapidly, taking over unsuitable areas such as nearby lagoons and lakes. Lagos suffers from water shortages, poor sanitation services, and heavy traffic. Government bodies and urban developers are finding it difficult to keep up with Lagos' rapid growth. Johannesburg is the largest city in South Africa, with a metropolitan population of more than 7 million. Johannesburg is also the world's largest city not situated on a river, lake, or coastline. The city developed around the gold and diamond industry situated on a mineral-rich mountain range. While mining operations are gradually losing importance in Johannesburg, most mining companies still have their headquarters there. The wealth and trade of these companies and other manufacturing industries is supported by Africa's largest stock exchange, the JSE, Johannesburg Stock Exchange. As such, Johannesburg has become the financial hub for the African continent. Much like Lagos, Johannesburg's unregulated development has caused certain infrastructure problems. During the last 4 decades, Johannesburg's inner city of Hillbrow has suffered from poor
Egypt's impact on other cultures was undeniably immense. From the earliest periods of pre-dynastic Egypt, there is evidence of trade connections that extended as far east as the Indus Valley. These trade routes passed through the Near East, resulting in an early exchange of motifs and ideas between the civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt. Brought even more active connections with Western Asia, including robust commercial and diplomatic relationships, as well as a mutual exchange of imagery and concepts with cultures like the Assyrians and the Hittites. Lively interactions with the south contributed to dynamic cultures, such as the Kushites, who ruled Egypt during the 25th dynasty and whose monuments displayed an innovative blend of local Nubian and pharaonic imagery. Rulers and the elite from Meroe, in modern Sudan, were buried in pyramid tombs for many centuries, with more than 200 having been identified. That country actually contains more pyramids within its borders than Egypt does. Egypt also provided some of the building blocks for the Aegean, Greek, and Roman cultures, and, through them, influenced many aspects of Western tradition. Today, Egyptian imagery, concepts, and perspectives are found everywhere. When you know what to look for, you will see them in architectural forms, on money, and in our day-to-day lives. Many cosmetic surgeons, for example, use the silhouette of Queen Nefertiti, whose name means the beautiful one has come, in their advertisements. Ancient Egyptian civilization lasted for more than 3,000 years and showed a stunning level of continuity. That is more than 15 times the age of the United States, and consider how often our culture shifts. As recently as 2003, there was no Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. While today we consider the Greco-Roman period to be in the distant past, it should be noted that it is closer to our own time than it was to that of the construction of the pyramids of Giza. It took humans nearly 4,000 years to build something, anything, taller than the Great Pyramid. Contrast that span to modern times. We get excited when a record lasts longer than a decade. Egypt's stability is in stark contrast to the ancient Near East of the same period, which endured an overlapping series of cultures and upheavals with amazing regularity. The earliest royal monuments, such as the Namba Palette carved around 3100 BCE, display identical royal costumes and poses as those seen on later rulers, even Ptolemaic kings, and Roman emperors on their temples more than 3 millennia later. This consistency and stability is closely linked with one of the central foundational concepts in the way ancient Egyptians saw the world around them. In their view, creation occurred when order triumphed over chaos and harnessed that amorphous power to bring the land of Egypt into existence. The perfect cosmic balance that resulted created the consistent cycles they saw in their natural world, such as the daily rising and setting of the sun and the Nile's annual inundation. This divine order was known as Ma'at, embodying truth, righteousness, justice, and cosmic law, and was eventually personified as a goddess. There was a perpetual struggle between Ma'at and the chaos, known as Isfet. From early in Egypt's history, a primary role of the pharaoh was to be the champion of Ma'at and preserve that cosmic order, to help protect Egypt from the Isfet that surrounded them. The ongoing preservation of Ma'at was seen as fundamentally important, and the drive to maintain that perfect cosmic balance permeated the culture on multiple levels. A vast amount of Egyptian imagery, especially royal imagery that was governed by decorum, a sense of what was appropriate, remained extraordinarily consistent throughout its history. This is why, especially to the untrained eye, their art appears extremely static, and in terms of symbols, gestures, and the way the body is rendered, it was intentional, as the consistency was the whole point. The Egyptians were well aware of their consistency, which they viewed as stability, divine balance, and clear evidence of Ma'at and the correctness of their culture. This consistency was also closely related to a fundamental belief that depictions had an impact beyond the image itself. Tomb scenes of the deceased receiving food or temple scenes of the king performing perfect rituals for the gods were functionally causing those things to occur in the divine realm. If the image of the bread loaf was omitted from the deceased's table, they had no bread in the afterlife. If the king was depicted with the incorrect ritual implement, the ritual was incorrect and could have dire consequences. This belief led to active resistance to change in codified depictions. The earliest recorded tourist graffiti on the planet came from a visitor from the time of Ramses II, who left their appreciative mark at the already 1,300-year-old site of the Step Pyramid at Saqqara, the earliest of the massive royal stone monuments. They were understandably impressed by the works of their ancestors and wrote of their desire to continue that ancient legacy. Egypt is a land of duality and cycles, both in topography and culture. The geography is almost entirely rugged, barren desert, except for an explosion of green that straddles either side of the Nile as it flows the length of the country. The river emerges from far to the south, deep in Africa, and empties into the Mediterranean Sea in the north after spreading from a single channel into a fan-shaped system, known as a delta, in its northernmost section. The river valley is flanked by imposing cliffs of limestone and sandstone, with deposits of other, harder stones like granite and granodiorite being found in the area of Aswan to the south. One of the reasons for the overall stability of Egyptian culture was that it was largely isolated by virtue of its geography. With high cliffs and expansive deserts bordering the east and west, the sea at the north, and a series of huge rapids in the Nile to the south known as cataracts, the stretch of the river valley that gave rise to dynastic Egypt was quite closed off from the outside. Egypt was undoubtedly the gift of the Nile, as the Greek historian Herodotus famously wrote. The influence of this river on Egyptian culture and development cannot be overstated. Without its presence, the civilization would have been entirely different. The Nile provided not only a constant source of life-giving water, but created the fertile lands that fed the growth of this unique and uniquely resilient culture. Each year, fed by melting snow in the far-off headlands deep in Africa, the Nile overflowed its banks in an annual flood that covered the ground with rich, black silt and produced incredibly fertile fields. The Egyptians referred to this area as Kemet, the Black Lands, and contrasted this dense, dark soil against the Deshret, the red lands of the sterile desert. The line between these zones was, and in most cases still is, a literal line. The visual effect is stark, appearing almost artificial in its precision. The annual inundation of the Nile was also a reliable, and measurable cycle that helped form their concept of the passage of time. In fact, the calendar we use today in the West is derived from one developed by the ancient Egyptians. They divided the year into 3 seasons: Akhet, inundation; Peret, growing emergence; and Shem, harvest. Each season was divided into 4 30-day months. Although this annual cycle, paired with the daily solar cycle that is so evident in the desert, led to a powerful drive to see the universe in terms of cyclical time, this idea existed simultaneously with the reality of linear time. These two concepts, the cyclical and the linear, came to be associated with 2 of their primary deities: Osiris, the eternal lord of the dead, and Ra, the sun god who was reborn with each dawn. Rulers in Egypt were complex intermediaries that straddled the terrestrial and divine realms. They were, obviously, living humans, but upon accession to the throne, they also embodied the eternal office of kingship itself. The Ka, or spirit, of kingship was often depicted as a separate entity standing behind the human ruler. This divine aspect of the office of kingship was what gave authority to the individual person who was the king. The living king was associated with the god Horus, the powerful, virile falcon-headed god who was believed to bestow the throne to the first human king. Horus's immensely important father, Osiris, was the lord of the underworld. One of the original divine rulers of Egypt, this deity embodied the promise of regeneration. Cruelly murdered by his brother Seth, the god of the chaotic desert, Osiris was revived through the potent magic of his wife Isis. Through her knowledge and skill, Osiris was able to sire the miraculous Horus, who avenged his father and threw his criminal uncle off the throne to take his rightful place. Few civilizations have enjoyed the longevity and global cultural reach of ancient Egypt. Their distinct visual expressions, writing system, and imposing monuments are instantly recognizable by viewers all around the world even today. Put simply, their branding was on point. Despite portraying significant stability over a vast period of time, their civilization was not as static as it may appear at first glance, particularly if viewed through our modern eyes and cultural perspectives. Instead, the culture was dynamic even as it revolved around a stable core of imagery and concepts. The ancient Egyptians adjusted to new experiences, constantly adding to their complex beliefs about the divine and terrestrial realms, and how they interact. This flexibility, wrapped around a base of consistency, was part of the reason ancient Egypt survived for millennia and continues to fascinate. With the blazing sun above, flanked by vast seas of shifting sand, and fed by the life-giving Nile River, which hid frightening creatures beneath its dark waters, the natural world of Egypt was inherently beautiful, but also potentially deadly. Outside the lush river valley, there was little protection from the ever-dominant sun, whose intensity was both feared and revered. The deserts were home not only to many dangerous creatures, but the sands themselves were also unpredictable and constantly shifting. The clear night skies dazzled with millions of stars, some of which seemed to move of their own accord while others rose and fell at trackable intervals. The Nile, with its annual floods, brought fertility and renewal to the land, but could also overflow and wreak havoc on the villages that lined its banks. Careful observers of their environment, the Egyptians perceived divine forces in these phenomena, and many of their deities, such as the powerful sun god Ra, were connected with elements from the natural world. The perception of divine powers existing in the natural world was particularly true in connection with the animals that inhabited the region. There was an array of creatures that the Egyptians would have observed or interacted with on a regular basis, and they feature heavily in the culture. One of the most distinctive visual attributes of Egyptian imagery is the myriad deities that were portrayed in hybrid form, with a human body and animal head. In addition, a wide range of birds, fishes, mammals, reptiles, and other creatures appear prominently in the hieroglyphic script. There are dozens of different birds alone. The Nile was packed with numerous types of fish, which were recorded in great detail in fishing scenes that became a fixture in non-royal tombs. Most relief and painting throughout Egypt's history was created for divine or mortuary settings, and they were primarily intended to be functional. Many tomb scenes included the life-giving Nile and all its abundance, with the goal of making that bounty available for the deceased in the afterlife. In addition to the array of fish, the river also teemed with far more dangerous animals, like crocodiles and hippopotami. Protective spells and magical gestures were used from early on to aid the Egyptians in avoiding those watery perils as they went about their daily lives. The desert, likewise, was full of potentially dangerous creatures. Lions, leopards, jackals, cobras, and scorpions were all revered for their attributes and feared for their ferocity. Soaring above were birds of prey, like falcons who were sharp-eyed hunters, and massive vultures that consumed decaying flesh and fed it to their young. Scarab beetles also seemingly brought new life from decay, and the sacred ibis, with their curved beaks, found sustenance hidden in the muddy banks of the Nile. All of these creatures, and many others, became closely associated with different deities very early in Egyptian history. The Egyptians did not worship animals. Instead, certain animals were revered because it was believed that they were related to particular gods and thus served as earthly manifestations of those deities. Even domesticated animals, such as cows, bulls, rams, and geese, became associated with deities and were viewed as vitally important. Cattle were probably the first animals to be domesticated in Egypt, and domesticated cattle, donkeys, and rams appear along with wild animals on pre-dynastic and early dynastic votive objects, showing massive herds that were controlled by early rulers, demonstrating their wealth and prestige. Pastoral scenes of animal husbandry appear in numerous private tomb chapels and wooden models, providing detailed evidence of their daily practices. Herdsmen appear caring for their animals in depictions that include milking, calving, protecting the cattle as they cross the river, feeding, herding, and many other aspects of their day-to-day care. Already in the pre-dynastic period, the king was linked with the virile wild bull, an association that continues throughout Egyptian history. One of the primary items of royal regalia was a bull tail, which appears on a huge number of pharaonic images. An early connection between the king and lions is also apparent. One scene on a pre-dynastic ceremonial pallet, the battlefield pallet, shows the triumphant king as a massive lion devouring his defeated foes. First dynasty kings appear to have kept lion cubs as pets. In addition, lions, among other animals, were associated with the burials of some early rulers. One of the most iconic images from ancient Egypt is the massive Great Sphinx at Giza, which was sculpted from the living rock of the plateau. This fused form, with the body of a lion and the head of the king, became a common visual expression of royal power. While many of the religious and cultural characteristics of ancient Egypt were evident from very early on and continued all the way through the Roman era, contributing to overall cultural stability, sweeping conceptual developments and adoptions of external elements are also evident. Throughout ancient Egypt's long history, periods of unified control were interspersed with moments of instability where parts of the country were controlled by different authorities. These repeated waves of political and cultural development create a decidedly complex history that spans thousands of years. The civilization of ancient Egypt obviously did not spring fully formed from the Nile mud, although the massive pyramids at Giza may appear to the uninitiated to have appeared out of nowhere. They were founded on thousands of years of cultural and technological development and experimentation. Dynastic Egypt, sometimes referred to as Pharaonic after Pharaoh, the Greek title of the Egyptian kings derived from the Egyptian title Paa, Great House, which was used from the New Kingdom on, which was the time when the country was largely unified under a single ruler, begins around 3000 BCE. The period before this, lasting from about 5000 BCE until the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under one ruler, is referred to as pre-dynastic by modern scholars. Prior to this were thriving Paleolithic and Neolithic groups, stretching back hundreds of thousands of years, descended from northward migrating Homo erectus, who settled along the Nile Valley. During the pre-dynastic period, ceramics, Figurines, mace heads, and other artifacts such as slate palettes used for grinding pigments begin to appear, as does imagery that will become iconic during the Pharaonic era, and we can see the first hints of what is to come. It is important to recognize that the dynastic divisions modern scholars use were not used by the ancients themselves. These divisions were created in the first chronological history of Egypt, written by an Egyptian priest named Manetho in the 3rd century BCE. Each of the 30 dynasties included a series of rulers usually related by family connections or the location of their seat of power. Egyptian history is also divided into larger chunks, known as kingdoms, and periods, to distinguish times of strength and unity, kingdoms, from those of change, foreign rule, or disunity, periods. Like many other ancient cultures, the Egyptians themselves referred to their history in relation to the ruler of the time. Years were recorded as the regnal dates of the ruling king, so that with each new reign, the numbers began anew. The usual dating format included the day of the month and season, along with the regnal year of the king. For example, day 4 of the 2nd month of the season Peret in the 3rd year of Khafra. This ancient practice creates challenges for modern historians, making it difficult to determine exact dating for many events and reigns. This is the reason that different resource books on ancient Egypt may provide slightly different dates for the same object. Generally, dates are provided here as circa, c, or approximate, for this reason.